Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Strategy Show. I'm Simon Severino, your host. I'm super excited to have with you founder of NatureBox, partner at M13 Ventures. Welcome, everybody, Gautam Gupta.
Hey, thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me. I think that may be the tallest stack of books I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I don't know how that's all staying in one piece, but that looks great.
it's Italian design, and you can even put out one and it will not collapse. So we
Wow.
will talk today how to stay mentally grounded as a business owner, as a founder, while everything goes up and down. How communication and transparency are key while you are on your entrepreneurial journey, and how to find peers you can learn from and you can commiserate with. Super excited. Gautam, share a little bit about the audience. What are you currently creating?
So, I started my career in venture capital, and then left the world of investing to start a company, which was called NatureBox, which is a multi-channel brand of snack food. After 6.5 years of being CEO of that company, I decided to hire a new CEO, took some time off, and then really decided to go back in the world of investing. And so I joined a firm called M13. Really, the big differentiator around M13 is that all of the partners have been operators and entrepreneurs. And so what we're trying to create is a new model in the venture capital ecosystem that is entirely comprised of former operators and founders, helping the next generation of founders succeed and hopefully avoid some of the mistakes and the pitfalls that we made when we were going through the journey.
What's the opposite? Other VCs are made of investment bankers and investment pros, but they never were in the weeds. Can you tell the audience also a little bit about the other
Yeah,
model?
yeah, sure. So, the early days of venture capital were largely driven by either sort of family office type of investors or by operators themselves. And so, if you think about some of the earliest investments in venture capital, often these were people that had come from the technology industry, had been successful in their own right, and then decided to take some of their personal wealth or on behalf of the corporate firms that they worked for, started to invest those dollars back into technology companies. But really, over the last 10 to 15 years, as the industry of venture capital has grown, you have a lot of new firms founded and being run by folks that have not been founders themselves or operators. You have a lot of venture capital firms that are being sort of run by career VCs or folks that have been around the finance investment banking sort of side of the world more so than having been founders. And so that's just, I think, a byproduct of the industry having grown, and needing to really scale the way that it has. And that's sort of where we find ourselves today is there's a huge portion of the industry who come from more traditional financier backgrounds than come from operating backgrounds.
We move now to the segment of the show where you can give the strategy award to one company, whoop whoop, that you see as doing stuff differently than others, but the right way. So if you could pick only one startup or bigger who is doing things differently but better, is doing it the right way, who would that be?
And I can't pick a company that I'm involved in, right?
There are no further rules than that.
Okay, all right.
You can pick
That
one.
makes it quite interesting. Well, I'll pick a company that I've gotten to know since I've been at M13. Although it's not a personal investment of mine, it was a company that the two founders of M13 had invested in previously, called Daily Harvest. And Daily Harvest is a company that's really revolutionizing the world of frozen food, and making frozen food more appetizing and appealing to the millennial consumer demographic. They initially started with smoothies, and they now sell dozens of products across all kinds of different categories: smoothies, harvest bowls, flatbread, ice cream, all kinds of different things. And I think the reason why I'm highlighting them is I think it's a really interesting way to take a wedge into an industry, and successfully grow from, they started with smoothies, successfully grow from that wedge to a much broader offering, that is now, really competing across all the different day parts and eating occasions that people experience. And it's a business that's done incredibly well. It's a business that we're, very excited about as a firm. And we just think that, when everyone in the industry went towards meal kits and went towards fresh, they sort of chose a different direction, and it's really worked out for them. So I think that would be the strategy award winner that I would pick.
Beautiful. Now, the entrepreneurial journey is something that is like a roller coaster and it's up and down. You have some ideas to share on how to stay grounded during that up and down. How can this be done?
Yeah, so maybe before I get into that, I'll just kind of tell a brief kind of story where I think it became apparent to me why managing the ups and downs is really important. My co-founder and I had started NatureBox in 2012. We were probably about 6 months in to running the company when we got a phone call from a TV show. It was one of these really big morning shows, right? Think the Today Show or Good Morning America. And the producer there said, "Hey, we're going to be featuring some of your products on the show tomorrow." It was a segment about eating healthier, and they were going to have a nutritionist there, and the nutritionist had selected NatureBox. And so we were over the moon excited. We had two other employees at that time. We told, kind of as a group of four, agreed to come in early the next morning because we thought the phone lines would be flooded. We called our developer and made sure that the website wouldn't go down because we thought there'd be so much traffic to the website. And the next morning, we all get in pretty early, I think 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. And for a couple hours, the phone lines are completely quiet. There's no one calling. And so we check the website, there's not that many people ordering. It sort of seems like a normal day. And it turns out that, they had kind of run out of time to really talk about NatureBox, but you could see it if you were watching the show, the camera sort of panned over our products, but they kind of ran out of time to really talk about it. And so, for me, that was a good example of no matter how good you think things are going to be, they're often never that good. But the converse is also true. No matter how bad you think something's going to be, it's often never that bad. And so it's really about managing your sort of mental health and staying pretty even keel, given that the startup journey is a roller coaster.
Absolutely. This is so powerful because, as we discussed before, if you have ever operated a business, building a product and then building a company, well, then it's such a roller coaster. And we have a 90-day coaching program, a growth booster for founders. And it's really all about growing and scaling, and it's all about revenue. But there is one part where we really work with them on their personal vision, and we try to make it a habit that they install a habit that every day brings them exactly in the center and in the state they want to be, because both that are really good they make you a little bit too high, and you shouldn't be that high.
Mhm.
And same thing for when it was really bad. You shouldn't be that touched by it. Try to stay in the middle, have your vision, and find something that helps you stay really in the middle, because you got to ship every week for a long period of weeks.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
The second thing that you wanted to share is about communication and transparency. What's your experience there?
Yeah, I have a lot of founders who ask, particularly as they start to scale the company beyond 10 or 20 employees, how to be a better CEO and how to be better at people management. And I think one of the first things that you have to realize is when you're running a company of 50, 100, or more employees. I've never ran a company of thousands of employees, but I assume that it's true for that as well. Is that so much of your job as CEO is people management, right? So much of your job is making sure that not only do people know what they need to do to create impact on the company, but people feel like they're being heard. That you're setting vision, direction, managing careers, all of those types of things, compensation. It all flows into kind of this topic around people management. And the thing that I usually tell entrepreneurs and startup founders who are for the first time managing a large number of people is, look, you're not going to succeed at everything, right? You are going to make some mistakes, and there are things that you don't necessarily need to be completely occupied with yourself, right? Because there are other people on the team that may have the responsibility to think of those things, right? Compensation is a good one. If you have a head of HR, maybe that head of HR is thinking about compensation strategy, but needs input from a CEO. But the two things that I think a CEO can do and should do, and the two things that are the unlocks for managing people, are communication and transparency. And I think it comes down, it's honestly that simple, right? If you can do a better job of keeping people in the know and keeping them in the loop, which is the way that I think about communication, and having a real operating system around how your company flows information from the management team down to sort of the lowest level in the company. I think that is success, and then transparency is the other one. If you create an environment where people feel like they can talk openly about issues, elephants in the room, and that they're being heard, then that is, in my experience, better than probably 80 to 90% of corporate environments, right? And so these things are not easy to do, but my point in kind of sharing all that is you don't need to boil the ocean to have a good corporate culture and to have employees who are engaged. You just need to focus on communication and transparency.
I'm curious about your take, because I remember when we started, I had, even in the first year, I had meetings with myself, even if I was the whole department. Like, I was the sales department, I was the IT department, I was the legal department, but I had a meeting,
Mhm.
the sales meeting, the weekly sales meeting. And some people who were seeing this were like, Simon, you are the sales team, so what's the meeting? And I was like, yeah, it's me, and I am reporting to the meeting. No, nobody's there yet. But first, it creates a certain rhythm. So what is in my calendar is important. What is not there is not going to happen. First thing.
Yep.
Second, I build a product with scalability in mind. I don't build for building. I build for it to scale, of course. So I go through it as if I had 2, 3 colleagues, and I have to report to them why I do it. How are the sales number? What are the new objections? Like if I would report, because then I write down also what is a good flow of these 60 minutes. And then when I had the first people in my sales team and I was handing over sales, well, then it was easy, and I knew what to report. and then in handing over, I knew what to tell them, what to report, and now they could hire their people
Yep.
then quite easily. And I had months of time, years of time, just developing the flow of the communication. So it helped me certainly, and we use it in our program. But I'm curious, what's your experience? How can people really learn it when they just have their first employees?
Yeah, I mean, I think you point out kind of two. There's two interesting points there and thoughts, and the first one is I think have a communications operating system or structure from as early into the business as you can. I wrote a blog post on this where just kind of identifying, the mistakes that I had made, and if I was going to do it again, what that operating system would look like. But I think that's one of the biggest things you can do is to have a system for communication, right? Going from daily meetings to weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, where you've identified what who is going to be talking to whom within the company, and what conversations need to take place, and they don't all have to start at the same time, right? Look, if you don't have a management team, then maybe the functional meetings or department meetings are not really department meetings. Maybe they're company meetings, all hands meetings. So you have to adapt given the size of the company, but I think you have to have some structure there, in my opinion. And then I think the second point that you bring up is the second thing that I take from what you're saying, which is really important, is founders also have to optimize around the way that they work, right? And in your example, you found time on your calendar for that sales meeting, right? And there may not have been a huge group of salespeople at that time, but it was important to have that time blocked off in your calendar. And this is one of the things that I talk to founders about pretty often is you have to adapt and kind of flex the organization to working within your style, right? And you have to really try to leverage your style to be the best that you can be. And in my opinion, it's really a bad thing to try to change your style completely, because often part of the magic of what makes a great founder is the way that they work, right? And so anyway, that's the second kind of thought that I take from what you were saying.
Absolutely. Also, it made it possible. We created these flows, these structures, in a very calm time, and then when growth hits, it hits usually at the wrong time. You are not prepared. It's
Yeah.
before summer, it's before holiday, and now you have
hmm
10 times more coming in. You have one joint venture kicks in. You are once in the Financial Times, and then boom, demand is hitting you. So in that moment, you don't have the time to build that flow and that procedures. In that moment, you wish you had them already, because now it's about delivery. It's not about creating structures.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I think the challenge is when you don't have that structure. I think there's two implications of that. One is exactly what you're saying. The second is that if you don't have that structure, you're often chasing into trying to improve communication, trying to have employees understand where they can create impact, and so you're now not only needing to manage the rapid growth of the company, but you're also needing to fix the system at the same time, and so you're spreading yourself even more thin in that scenario than had you had the operating system in place to begin with.
Yeah, and it's intense enough to manage the growth. You don't need another problem on top.
Mhm.
So before we go to the third part about the peers and the role of the peers in all this trajectory, what are two books that inspire you professionally?
So I'll pick two that are a bit different from each other. The first book that I would mention is more of an inspiration, I think, for founders and anyone on that founding journey. and that is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. And I think that's and I every founder journey and story can be a little polarizing, so maybe it's not for everyone. But for me, what I got out of it was just the persistence and willingness to stick it out and sort of see the Nike kind of vision through. And just how creative they were in how they built their brand. It's an incredible story. I think for me, it was very inspirational, especially as a founder going through tough times of seeing how even in tough times you can kind of keep yourself going and that good things can kind of happen in the end. And then the second book that I would mention is one that I recommend to founders that I work with, which is a book called WHO, and it's really a process and method for hiring. And so one of the things that I found as a CEO, and again, this goes back to the point that we were talking earlier, is a lot of founders are for the first time being in a position where they need to hire people or manage people. Who is really focused on that hiring process? And it really takes what I think at most companies is a convoluted sort of not even a real process. It's like, hey, we need to go hire VP of Eng. We don't really know what they want. We want that person to do or what's going to make that role successful, but we just know that we need someone to manage the engineers or hire engineers. And they go out and hire someone, and then 6 months down the road, they say, "Oh, that didn't work out. I wonder why." Right? I think this book talks about sort of the pitfalls in hiring and how to avoid some of those by just having a much better process going into it and clearly defining what you want to get out of that role so that you're not only hiring for that criteria, but you're also then evaluating the role based on that criteria.
Beautiful. I think that Who and Top Grading are the two best hiring books, really, if you're starting to hire. And Who is the most applicable one because it gives you everything that you need and you can go quite quickly directly to it. Top Grading, you need to work a little bit more and you will find much more ideas, but you need like a summer vacation to get through it. And so if you're a busy founder, go with Who. That's the best one. If you have a little bit more time,
Top Grading is great too. Yeah. Top Grading is great too, and just a good practice, I think, for CEOs to learn and get into the habit of doing, even outside of hiring, the notion of top grading. So,
what are two books that you find inspiring on a personal level?
Yeah, so I mean, Shoe Dog is definitely one of those that I find inspiring on a personal level. I just finished Bob Iger's book. I'm forgetting the name of it, Ride of a Lifetime, I think, which I thought was an exceptional story of how Disney, not just of Bob Iger, but of how they were able to turn around Disney and do some of the amazing things that they've done with that company. And then I also just finished, actually, after reading Bob Iger's book, I felt compelled to go read the Pixar story. And so I read Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc., which is also, if you're a big movie fan, has some really cool, background stories of how they made some of the early Pixar movies, and so those are two recent reads, but two that I definitely found inspiring in the sense of just what great CEOs can bring to the table, and how, especially in the Pixar book, what I found was super interesting there was, that was very much a founder's journey, all odds stacked against them for a very long period of time. And so I just enjoyed the sort of being able to kind of read that and read how they built such a unique culture around creating greatness. And in the end, it worked out really well.
Being an entrepreneur can feel quite lonely during some parts of the journey. What is the role of peers and how can somebody unlock that?
I'm a big believer in peer groups. I think that most founders should have, and as early into the company, should aspire to create a peer group around them. They can either do that, a founder can either do that through a formalized networking group like YPO, Young Presidents Organization, or EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. These are multinational organizations that basically exist to connect founders with each other, and they have different models for how they do this. But you can either go that formal path or the informal path, which is to just become friends with founders that are either at your stage, or I think what's really helpful also is to have one or two founder peers who are at a stage, the next stage of the company development, because often those founders have made some of the mistakes that you as a founder may go through and have had the time to reflect on what they may have done differently. And so I often find that by having a diversified peer group, people at your stage of business, people at a later stage of business, you're all able to kind of learn from each other and exchange kind of share learning, share resources, network, that sort of thing. If you go down that informal path, it can be helpful to get introductions to other founders through your investors. Usually your investors are investing in multiple companies. There's an incentive for their founders to know each other. And so I think there's a good reason for why your investor might be helpful in putting those groups together.
What are some trends in the VC world that you see coming up and that you find relevant and that you are observing and trying to learn from?
I think venture is going through a lot of change right now. I think there's a very good argument to be made that there's an unbundling of advice and capital, and that the system of 10 or 20 years ago, where you would choose a VC and that VC would bring capital and a bunch of resources, there's an argument to be made for either side, either direction. There's an argument to be made that capital is plentiful and that you can go get capital from the angel lists of the world or from individuals, and those individuals can be the sort of source of advice themselves, or you can just source a group of advisors and peers and things like that to get that, to solve that part of it. And on the other side of that argument is that capital is being commoditized. There's so many players in any category today. And so in order to succeed, you have to create systems and really give your companies unfair advantages. Certainly at M13, that's the belief that we have, is that capital and advice has unbundled, but that through bringing systems and repeatable process, you can accelerate the growth of a company and help a founder avoid some of the mistakes that they may have otherwise made and kind of create these unfair advantages. So I think there's a very good and active debate around those things. And then the last thing I'd say that's an interesting evolution is that the sources of capital are evolving. And so it used to be that you couldn't raise debt or alternative forms of capital until you were a much later stage company. I think that's changing. And there are companies like Clearbank that are making it much more accessible to sort of find these alternative financing paths. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of a few different things happening in the industry that are pretty interesting and reflective of change.
Absolutely. Now, who should be my next guest on the show and why?
Gosh, I've got to give that a little bit of thought. I think, let's see, in terms of things that are things are pretty interesting in the world of tech right now. I mean, obviously, I think Clubhouse has had its kind of moment over the last month or so. And I think that's a super interesting story to kind of track and to follow. Um, I think there's a lot of discussion around the intersection of biotech and really life sciences and technology, otherwise kind of biotech, that I think is pretty interesting. So I'd have to give some thought to a specific name, but I think it'd be interesting to hear from either the founder of a company like a Clubhouse that is in the news so much these days, or maybe just to scratch a personal itch, to go a bit deeper into the biotech world.
What could we learn from them if we get them on the show?
I mean, I think that there's well, let's maybe take the Clubhouse example. I think that audio is a fascinating format that, if you think about the shift that's happening with audio, it's really that we're going from devices where we had to look at the device to engage with it, right? So in the case of your iPhone or computer, you have to be looking at the screen to engage with the device and to interact with the device. And the audio world, whether it's Clubhouse or other things, present a paradigm of you don't have to look at the device anymore, right? So with headphones, you can interact with a computer purely through audio and being heads up versus heads down. I think that's a pretty interesting shift, and I think that has the potential to change a lot of consumer behavior, and it has the potential to infiltrate a huge portion of the day where you just simply can't be looking at a device or looking at a screen. And so it has the potential to be sort of the next wave of applications that consumers engage with.
It has never made sense to have your attention in your hand while you walk over the street.
Mm-hmm.
It's so dangerous. It's so uncomfortable. It doesn't make any sense at all. Why is the innovation there still not happening? What are the obstacles there from your perspective? Because it's so logical to expand that, but the Google Glass didn't work. What is it?
Yeah, I think so. That is probably another area where there's fierce argument on all sides. I think the Google Glass thing, I just don't know. I'm not as convinced that people want to be wearing screens. Um, but that said, I'm sure there's a segment of the population, and if there's enough value being driven by that screen, and if it feels natural enough, maybe. But I think the thing that's really unique about audio is that we all have now these headphones in our ears, for phone calls or listening to podcasts or whatever it may be. And so just by virtue of we've already gained exposure to this device, right? It's not a new device. It's not, sure, the wireless component is new and novel, but the aspect of headphones is something that's super familiar to anyone that has a smartphone. So I think maybe it's more, driven by that than anything else.
Cool. Where can people stay in touch with you, find more about you?
Yeah, sure. So Twitter, I try to actively or try to be more active on Twitter. It's G Ramblings, or feel free to email if you're, especially if you're a founder looking for some advice or help. Feel free to email me. It's Gautam at m13.co. So.
Which type of founders should approach M13 and why?
Yeah. We are, so we're an early stage consumer tech focused fund. And so by early stage, it's usually for us seed or Series A. We don't do a lot in pre-seed. We often kind of need or want to see a product before we'll invest. And so we're kind of decidedly not pre-seed or at the inception stage of a company, but generally post-product. Don't need to see a ton of revenue or a ton of traction. So it's really that kind of seed Series A. And then we're consumer tech focused. And so we invest in businesses that sell directly to the consumer, as well as companies that enable consumer applications.
Thank you so much, Gautam, for being on the show, and come back soon.
Of course. My pleasure.